I had been camped above the old Cascade Tunnel alignment near Stevens Pass, with a cheap tarp, a sleeping pad that never held air for long, and a graduate student's idea of being prepared. A couple of rock hammers, a hand lens, a field notebook sealed in a plastic bag, a headlamp with extra batteries, a small first aid kit, and a battered backpack that still smelled faintly of diesel from some field season I could not place. I was there to look at the scars the mountain never hides. Fractured faces, old shotcrete patches, drain lines that always clog, and the way water insists on owning every low point. I had a map printout folded into squares, a pencil, and a schedule that meant nothing once the first alerts started hitting phones down in the valley. At first it sounded distant and ordinary. Sirens in the west, a few pop-up messages. A rumor passed through a hiker's mouth before the hiker even stopped walking. Something bad in Seattle. Something spreading fast. The words changed every time someone repeated them. Flu, riot, terror, containment. The only stable thing was how the traffic noise grew on the highway and then stayed constant, a long rolling growl that did not match a normal weekend at the pass. I packed without thinking it through. I rolled wet gear into the tarp, cinched the straps too tight, and started down toward the trailhead with the kind of urgency that is usually reserved for incoming weather. At the eastern trailhead, the parking area looked wrong. Not full, not empty, just scattered with open doors, a couple of backpacks left on the gravel, and a car with a trunk open, as if someone had walked away mid-thought. No one yelled. No one explained. I saw a man standing near the edge of the lot holding a phone at arm's length, turning in circles as if a certain angle would bring back a signal. A second man sat on the bumper of a pickup truck and stared at the highway with the same fixed posture people get when something in their routine collapses and their body is waiting for a new set of instructions. I tried my own phone. No signal. I walked to where the road bent and watched vehicles bunch up, stop, inch forward, then stop again. It was not just the westbound lanes. Eastbound was jammed too. People had tried to run in both directions and met the same problem. Too many bodies, too many cars, too few exits. I could smell hot brakes on cold air. I could hear horns, then a stretch of silence, then horns again. I did what everyone does when information disappears. I moved toward anything that looked like it might give me a choice. In the far corner of the lot, a road bike lay on its side beside an SUV, the chain tangled and the front tire half deflated. No one was holding it. No one looked at it. A door on the SUV was open, and the interior light was still on, the dim little bulb burning in broad daylight. I stood there for a beat too long, watching myself hesitate. Then I grabbed the bike by the handlebars and walked it away. I told myself I would return it. I told myself the owner was already gone. I told myself that borrowing is not theft when the world is breaking. The truth was simpler. I wanted to move. I pumped the tire with a tiny frame pump clipped to the bike. The valve hissed as it seated. The tire held. I swung a leg over and started pedaling along the shoulder, past stalled cars, past a woman crying while she talked into a phone that had no service, past a man waving a reflective vest in the air as if he could conduct the traffic with his bare hands. Someone shouted at me once, a word I did not stop to parse. I kept my eyes forward and my mouth closed. I had the backpack on, the straps biting my shoulders. The bike was too small for me, but it rolled, and rolling was everything. I made it maybe a mile before the shoulder became a mess of scattered debris and people walking in the lane dragging suitcases that would never make sense on this road. The sound grew worse. Not just horns. There were distant cracks that did not belong to engines or doors. I did not label them at first. I did not want to. My brain tried to file them under construction, rockfall control, anything familiar. Then another crack, sharper, and a chain reaction of noise afterward. Shouting, a car alarm, then running feet. That was when the mountain started behaving differently. It carried sound and threw it back. Echoes came from the slopes and the cut banks. A single bang became a series. I ditched the bike in a ditch beside the highway when the crowd thickened, and I could no longer slip past without brushing people. The bike had done its job. It had bought me distance. I stepped off, left it there, and moved uphill toward the rougher ground where fewer people would follow. My boots slipped in wet needles. I used my hands on trees and rock. I was not thinking about views or routes, not yet. I was thinking about getting out of the human stream that was starting to boil. I had been up here before for a survey class. It was not some secret tunnel knowledge, not a treasure map. It was a detail I remembered from a report I had skimmed because it touched my area of interest. Older alignments, maintenance adits, dead ends sealed when budgets ran out, and liability became the only active policy. There was a side opening tucked into a rock face, hidden from the highway unless you knew where to look. It had been a maintenance access at one point, then sealed. The report had mentioned it as a hazard and an interesting exposure. I remembered the line because the professor had circled it and said out loud, "This is what abandonment looks like." I found it by following the drainage channel that ran down the slope, the kind cut by water over years, not by a machine. The opening was set back under a short overhang. Someone had bolted a metal plate over it at some point, then added a crude concrete berm. The plate had been pried at the edge, not fully, just enough to tell me someone else had wanted in. I squatted, pressed my fingers into the gap, and felt cold air move against my skin. That air had the smell of wet rock and old dust. It had the steadiness of underground spaces that do not care about weather. I slid my rock hammer into the gap and levered slow, listening for the pitch changes in the metal. The sound traveled down into the dark and came back to me in a thin ring. The berm cracked under my boot as I kicked at it. Concrete gave way in chunks that looked too clean, broken by frost more than by force. I made a space just big enough to wedge my shoulders through. Then I took off the backpack, shoved it ahead, and wriggled in after it. The metal scraped my jacket. The rock pressed my ribs. The tunnel air met my face and stayed there, not gusting, not changing. Inside, the darkness was immediate. My headlamp turned it into a narrow cone. The space was a maintenance side opening, maybe 6 feet high at best, rough cut through rock, and lined in places with old timber supports that had dried and shrunk. Some sections had corrugated metal panels shoved against the wall, probably left by someone who had worked here decades ago and never came back. The floor was uneven, with wet gravel and patches of slick clay. Water dripped from somewhere above, steady and patient. Each drip landed with a soft click that repeated and repeated until my brain tried to count it and failed. I set the backpack down and stood still, letting my ears adjust. Not to silence, to how the place held sound. Every shuffle of my boot, every breath through my nose, every zip of a pocket sounded larger than it should. I could already tell privacy would be a joke. If someone else was in this system, he would hear me. If someone was outside, he might hear me too if he stood in the right spot. I turned off the headlamp for a moment and sat in the dark. I wanted to see if there was any light leak, any hint that the opening was visible from deeper inside. There was none. The dark did not thin. When I turned the lamp back on, I did a quick inventory. Water was the first thing. I had 2 bottles, both half full. I had a small filter meant for streams. I had some snacks, nothing serious. A couple of protein bars, a bag of trail mix, a crushed apple. I had a lighter and a tiny stove, but underground fire is not warmth without consequences. I had a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, but I also knew that cold air that never warms up will win if you let it. I had a knife. I had no gun. I had no plan besides wait a night. The first gunfire I heard clearly was not far. It snapped in the pass, then echoed hard, then snapped again. It did not sound controlled. It sounded angry. The echoes made it hard to locate, but I could tell it was outside, down nearer the road. I stayed still, knees bent, the headlamp aimed at the floor to keep light from spilling out of the opening. I listened. More cracks, shouting. Then the sound of something heavy hitting a car, maybe a door slam, maybe a collision. A woman screamed once. It cut off fast, not fading, not moving away, just stopping. I sat back against the wall and held my breath without thinking about it, then forced myself to breathe normally. The tunnel air was cold, but it did not smell bad. It smelled clean in the way wet stone can smell clean. That almost made it worse. It felt wrong for a place to smell calm while people were falling apart outside. I told myself I would wait until morning. I told myself daylight would reset things. I unrolled the sleeping pad, laid the bag out, and tried to arrange my gear so I could grab it in one motion. I made a small barricade at the opening using the broken concrete chunks, not to seal it, just to make it harder to step through without noise. The chunks scraped on rock. I winced at every scrape. The sound ran down the passage and came back. That was the first lesson. Everything I did would announce itself. I slept in short stretches, not because I was scared in the ordinary sense, but because the drip rhythm and the far noise kept changing. Sometimes it was quiet enough that I could hear the highway again, the distant engine growl. Sometimes the growl stopped and I could hear voices. Sometimes those voices were close enough that I could pick out words, and sometimes they were just shapes of sound. I did not move during the voices. I kept the headlamp off and stared into the dark, waiting for footsteps on rock near the opening. Morning did not reset anything. It just made the sound clearer. The highway was still jammed. The horns came in waves, then stopped, then came again. I heard someone on a loudspeaker at some point, or someone trying to sound official. The words were lost in echo and distance. Then there were more bangs that were not horns, and there was a new sound that made my mouth go dry. Banging on metal, repeated, not random. It had a rhythm people use when they are trying to get someone's attention. I crawled toward the opening and pressed my face close to the gap without letting the light show. The outside air was colder than the tunnel air now. Or maybe it only felt colder because it moved. I could see a strip of daylight through the gap, a pale line. I could also see motion, blurred, shadows passing. A man spoke nearby. "Hello? Anyone in there?" He sounded tired, not panicked. That made him more dangerous. Then another voice, younger, higher. "We can pry it open. We can get in." I stayed silent. I did not clear my throat. I did not shift. I did not even swallow loudly. I held my hands flat on the rock and counted drips. The voices moved away after a while. Something scraped, a metal clank. Then footsteps retreated downhill. That was when I stopped thinking of the tunnel as shelter and started thinking of it as contested space. Someone had noticed the opening before. Someone else had noticed it now. If I stayed, I needed to control the approach, not with strength, but with friction and uncertainty. I needed anyone who tried to enter to hesitate and to make noise and to feel exposed. I spent the next hour moving deeper in, mapping the passage by headlamp and touch. It went farther than I expected, maybe a few 100 feet, and then it branched into a rough chamber where older work had widened the cut. There were rusted rails embedded in the floor, half buried, and a collapsed timber set that had fallen inward. The smell changed there, slightly more stale but still not foul. I found a puddle that looked fed by the ceiling drip, collecting in a low spot. I filtered some of it into a bottle and tasted it. It tasted of stone and old metal, but it did not taste of decay. I drank slowly, then forced myself to stop. In the chamber, I found signs of earlier squatters. Not fresh trash, not glossy wrappers, but old paper and a soot stain on rock where someone had built a small fire. A flattened sleeping bag that had been cut and used as padding. A plastic jug with a faded label, and footprints in the clay that were not mine, pressed and dried, some overlaid by newer ones. That hit me harder than any distant gunfire. It meant this place was known. It meant people used it. It meant I was not the first to look at the mountain and decide it could be a hiding place. I did not stay in the chamber. It was too open, too echo-prone. I went back toward the opening and chose a spot where the passage narrowed and turned. That bend mattered. It meant someone at the entrance could not see my position even with a light. It meant I could hear approach, and still have a second to decide what to do. I moved my sleeping setup there and arranged broken rock into a low wall in front of me. Again, not for strength, but to force someone to climb and scrape. Then I built noise. It sounds stupid to say it that way, but noise was my early warning system. I tied a length of cord across the passage near the bend, low enough that someone would catch it with a boot. I clipped metal items onto it. A spoon, a spare carabiner, a few pieces of scrap metal I found in the chamber. If the cord moved, those would click. I placed loose gravel piles on flat rock near the entrance, where a footstep would crunch louder than normal. I dragged a metal panel a few feet and propped it so it would shift if brushed. It was all improvised, but it was honest. I was not setting traps to hurt someone. I was setting traps to warn me and to make someone feel watched. The first infected I heard was not in the tunnel. It was outside, down the slope. A series of wet, uneven sounds that did not match normal running. Then the shouting started. A man yelled, "Back up, back up!" Another voice screamed a name. A car horn stuck on and did not stop. The noise built into a jumble that the mountain carried and multiplied. I could not see it. I could only build it in my head from fragments. Later, closer, I heard scraping at the entrance. I turned off the lamp and moved behind my rock wall, knees tight, one hand on the knife, the other holding my headlamp ready to flash if I had to. The cord near the bend stayed still. No click. The scraping continued, slow. Then it stopped. Then it started again. Whoever was out there was careful. That meant he had either experience or patience. Neither was good for me. A voice spoke, quiet. "Hey." It was the same tired voice from earlier. "If someone's in there, he can relax. I'm not trying to hurt anyone." I stayed silent. The man continued, "I know this opening. People used it. If he's in there, he's not the first. I just need somewhere to get out of the traffic mess. One night. That's it." I did not answer, because if I answered, I gave him proof I existed, and proof I was close enough to hear. Silence let him doubt. Silence let him worry that the tunnel might be empty, but still dangerous. He moved away after a while. I heard a boot scuff the berm outside. Then the noise faded. I waited longer than felt reasonable before I turned the lamp back on. My hands were shaking a little, not from fear as a feeling, but from the strain of staying still and ready. I flexed my fingers until the stiffness eased. By the second day, the hunger problem started to take shape. Not desperation, not weakness, just an accounting. I had maybe 2 days of snacks if I rationed hard. The tunnel had water, probably. It had no calories. I could leave and look for food among abandoned cars, but leaving meant being seen. It also meant the tunnel might be taken while I was gone. A shelter you cannot hold is not shelter. I made a rule and said it out loud under my breath, because rules feel more real when you hear them. If he steps in, I make him leave. I do not share this space. Sharing is how people die. I hated the sentence the moment I formed it, but I did not take it back. That night, I heard movement deeper in the system. Not at the entrance, behind me past the chamber. A small click, then another. Rock shifting, a scrape that sounded close enough to be real, not echo. I froze and listened until my ears felt hot from effort. Then I crawled forward, lamp off, and moved toward the chamber with the knife in my hand, and the other hand sliding along the wall. My boots barely touched the floor. I tried to place weight where the ground felt solid. In the chamber, my headlamp revealed something I had missed. A slit in the wall near the back, narrow, partly hidden by collapsed timber. A secondary cut, maybe an old drain adit or a utility access. It was too tight for a person, unless he was very thin and motivated. The fresh scuffs on the clay near it were not mine. I stared at the slit for a long time. Lamp beam steady. Water dripped. The tunnel did not give me any other sound. No breathing, no footsteps. If someone had come in through that slit, he was either hiding deeper in or he had backed out when he heard me approach. Either way, I was no longer alone by default. I was alone by negotiation, and I had not been part of the negotiation. I took a strip of reflective tape from my gear, something I used for marking sampling locations, and placed it on the floor a few feet from the slit. If someone crossed, he would scuff it. I placed another piece on a rock. If someone moved the rock, the tape would peel. Then I backed away and returned to my bend position, and I did not sleep. The next morning, I checked the tape. The strip on the floor was scuffed and dirty. The edges curled. The rock tape was torn. Someone had come out in the dark. He had known enough to try not to leave obvious marks, but he had not expected reflective tape because no one thinks like a graduate student marking a transect. I had a problem with no clean solution. I could confront him and risk a fight in a tunnel where sound would bring attention, and where a struggle could become fatal with one bad fall. I could pretend I did not know, and hope he stayed behind the slit, and did not come toward my supplies. Or I could make the tunnel so annoying that he would choose to leave. I chose annoyance. I spent that day shifting rocks to narrow the passage between the chamber and my bend, creating uneven footing. I hung more clickers on cord. I moved the metal panel closer to the bend so it would tilt and clang if touched. I piled loose gravel in a line, and then sprinkled a little water from my bottle to make it cling so a footprint would show. I wanted whoever was behind me to feel the tunnel change under his feet, to feel watched without seeing eyes. That evening, I heard him test it. A soft step, then a pause. Another step, then a small click of metal. Silence. Then the retreating scuff back toward the chamber. He did not speak. He did not cough. He did not announce himself. He was careful. I waited until his sound faded. Then I moved forward and spoke toward the darkness in a steady voice I barely recognized as mine. This side is taken. If he needs water, he can take it from the puddle in the chamber. He does not come past the bend. If he comes past the bend, I will make noise. Noise brings attention. Attention brings the infected. The tunnel returned my words back to me in thin layers. It felt wrong to hear my own voice repeated by rock. I turned off the lamp and waited for an answer. After a long stretch, I heard a single tap, deliberate, from deeper in. One tap, not a code I knew, just acknowledgement, then silence. That was the beginning of an agreement between two strangers who never shook hands. It did not make me feel safe. It made me feel responsible for a boundary I might not be able to enforce. On day 3, I left the tunnel for the first time. I did it at dawn, when the light outside was gray and the highway noise was lower. I moved the concrete chunks aside carefully, listening to every scrape. I slipped out, crouched low, and scanned the slope. The parking area below was worse. Cars were abandoned in crooked angles. A couple of doors hung open. A jacket lay on the ground, as if someone had dropped it while running. I moved along the tree line, staying off the road. I kept the backpack on but loosened the straps to move quietly. I had a plan that was barely a plan. Find a car that looked abandoned. Take any food and water, get back before anyone noticed my trail. The first vehicle I approached had a smashed window. Glass glittered on the seat. I did not touch it. That kind of break suggested a struggle or a theft. Both meant other people nearby. I moved on. The second vehicle was a sedan with the doors closed and keys still in the ignition. The driver's seat was empty. The radio was off. On the passenger seat sat a paper bag from a gas station, the top folded over. I opened the door a crack and listened. Nothing. I widened it and reached in, grabbed the bag, and stepped away. Inside were 2 bottles of water, a pack of crackers, and a small bag of candy. It felt absurd to be relieved by candy. I took it anyway. I also found a cheap fleece blanket in the back seat and pulled it out. It smelled of perfume and sweat. I rolled it tight and shoved it into my pack. More insulation mattered underground. On my way back, I saw movement near the highway. 2 figures stumbled between cars. At first I assumed they were injured, people trying to climb out of traffic. Then one of them turned his head in a way that did not track anything. He moved toward a car and pressed his face against the window. His hands pawed at the glass, not with purpose, just with repetition. The other figure shuffled into the lane and stopped when a horn blared, not reacting, not flinching. The horn kept going. The figure did not care. I stepped back into the trees and held still. I watched for a full minute, maybe 2. The figures did not speak. They did not call out. They did not check behind them. They just drifted, slow, as if following some sound I could not hear. I did not wait to learn more. I moved uphill, careful and quiet, and slid back into my tunnel opening with my breath controlled and my hands steady. I rebuilt the small barricade and crawled to my bend spot, then sat there with my back against rock and ate exactly 2 crackers, not more, to keep my mouth from getting too dry. When I checked on the chamber later, the reflective tape was scuffed again. My unseen neighbor was still there. The puddle had ripples, fresh, as if someone had drawn water not long before. I felt a small relief that he had used the water instead of coming toward me. Then I felt annoyed at myself for feeling relief. The 4th day was the first day I heard someone say my name. It started as a voice outside, near the entrance, casual, too casual. Nate? I did not move. I did not blink much. I kept my lamp off and listened. The voice came again, clearer. Nate Hollis, if you're in there, say something. My stomach tightened, in a way that made me feel hollow. I had not told anyone my last name up here. I had not introduced myself to strangers at the trailhead. I had not spoken to anyone since I entered. I had not even said my own name out loud. The voice continued, still calm. He can stop pretending. I know it's him. He was up here with the geology group last year. Professor Mills. He wrote the report. He knows the opening. He's the one. I did not know the voice. That did not help. It meant the speaker had gotten my name from somewhere else. The professor's name was real. The class was real. The report was real. Those details were not guessed. I shifted my weight slightly, and the gravel under my boot made a tiny crunch. The voice outside stopped. I could picture the man tilting his head, listening. Then he spoke again, softer. There he is. I stayed still. I did not reach for the knife. I already had it. I did not aim the headlamp. I kept it off. I listened for footsteps stepping into the opening. Nothing came in. Instead, the man spoke in a voice that sounded practiced. Nate, listen. I'm not here to take anything. I'm here because someone else is in there too. He came through the back slit. He's been watching. He's been stealing. He's dangerous. I can help you clear him out. The words were arranged to hook me. They included a truth I already knew, which made the lie parts harder to spot. Yes, someone was in there too. Yes, there was a back slit. Yes, someone had crossed my tape. The rest was a story built on that foundation. The man outside added, I've got food, I've got water, I've got a flashlight, I've got a crowbar. We can do it clean. He won't even know. I stayed silent. Silence was not bravery. Silence was the only move that did not make things worse. If I spoke, the man would learn exactly how far in I was. If I stepped, he would hear it. If I turned on light, he might see it through the gap. After a long pause, I heard another sound outside. A second person. A woman's voice this time, lower and impatient. He's not answering because he's scared. Just pry it open. Metal scraped on metal at the entrance. A crowbar. The berm crackled as pressure shifted. The plate groaned. I crawled back, away from the opening, as quietly as I could, moving to the bend where my rock wall and noise cords were set. I needed distance. If they forced entry, I needed the turn to hide light and shape. I also needed to make a decision I hated. If they came in, I would make noise on purpose. I would pull the metal panel down, kick gravel, bang rock. I would do it because I had heard enough outside to know the infected were nearby, drawn by sound and human movement. If the intruders wanted the tunnel, they could have it with company. The plate shifted again, louder. Then I heard a sharp snap and a curse that was cut off quickly, swallowed before it became too ugly. The mountain echoed it anyway, turning it into a smear of sound. The woman whispered, harsh. He's barricaded it. Push. I waited until I heard boots scrape on the tunnel floor. That meant they had gotten enough gap to step in. I did not wait for them to reach the bend. I reached up, grabbed the propped metal panel and yanked it down hard. It clanged against rock, a bright bell sound that the tunnel amplified and threw outward. Then I kicked the loose gravel piles and slapped my rock hammer against the wall twice. Outside, the response was immediate. Not words, movement. A rush of feet on gravel and pavement below, mixed with a sound that was not normal running, uneven and dragging. The two intruders at the entrance froze. I could hear it in how their boots stopped mid-step. The woman hissed, "What was that?" I made the noise again. 2 more hammer strikes, another panel scrape. I turned it into a beacon. The intruders backed out fast. Their boots scraped the concrete chunks. The metal plate squealed as it shifted. The man outside spoke once, no longer calm. "Stop, stop, stop." I did not stop until I heard them retreat down slope, crashing through brush, not caring about stealth anymore. Then I stopped, not because I felt safe, but because more noise would also bring the infected closer to my own entrance. I moved to the gap and listened. The outside was a mess of echoes and horns and shouting that came from farther away now. Somewhere down near the cars, something slammed against metal repeatedly. A car door, a trunk, a body. I could not tell. The name problem stayed. Someone had my name and knew enough about my life to use it. That meant my little private refuge was not private at all. It was part of a map other people carried. That night, my unseen neighbor spoke for the first time. Not from outside, from behind in the tunnel, a voice barely above a whisper. He should not have made noise. I turned slowly, lamp off, and aimed my words into the dark. He should not have used my name. The voice behind me came again, still calm. He got it from the report. Your name is on the report. Students sign those. That was true. I had not thought of it because it felt too small to matter. A document in a class archive, a PDF somewhere. But people cling to documents in crises. They cling to any piece of certainty. Someone could have found it on a phone before service died, or printed it, or heard it from someone who knew someone. I kept my own voice low. If he knows that, he knows the slit too. The unseen man's answer was a small exhale. He knows. He wants it. He will come back. I made myself ask the next question even though it felt dangerous. Who are you? A pause. Then, not important. That was the end of his participation. No name, no backstory, just a warning. I hated it, but I also respected it. A person who stays unnamed is a person who intends to leave options open. By the end of the first week, the outside noise changed again. The highway horns were fewer. The steady engine growl faded. The pass went quiet in a way that did not match normal quiet. It was not peaceful. It was abandoned. When wind moved through the trees, it sounded louder because there was less human noise to mask it. I established a routine because routine is a form of control. Morning, I checked my early warning cords for shifts. I checked the reflective tape near the slit. I filtered water into bottles. I ate a small portion of food, then forced myself to stop. Midday, I crept out for short scavenging runs when the slope looked empty. I avoided the highway itself and moved among cars only when I had to. I took what made sense. Sealed snacks, bottled water, a small pack of batteries, a heavier jacket. I found a compact emergency blanket and tucked it into my bag, even though it crinkled. I found a cheap multi-tool and kept it. Every return to the tunnel felt like crossing back into a rule set the mountain wrote. I saw infected more than once during those runs. I never approached. I never tested. I watched from cover and learned patterns. They drifted toward sound. They clustered near blocked cars and then wandered away. Sometimes they stood still for long stretches, then moved again as if triggered by something distant. Once I saw one press his face against a windshield and leave fog on the glass. Another time I saw two of them shuffle into the brush and disappear uphill, following something I could not see. That made me move faster on my return. If infected could wander uphill, the tunnel was not protected by elevation alone. The second week, the man outside came back. I did not see his face. I knew him by the way he spoke my name with ownership. Nate, he called, staying just outside the entrance. He did not shout. He did not plead. He spoke as if we had an appointment. I brought supplies. I brought a trade. I stayed silent. He continued. I know you made noise last time. That was smart. I respect that. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to offer you a better situation. There is a service building down the road. Maintenance shed. I have keys. There's a heater inside. There's canned food. You can come with me and we can lock it. The offer was too specific to be invented. but that did not make it safe. A locked building with a heater is also a trap if the wrong person controls the keys. I did not answer. He tried again, and the tone shifted, a little sharper. "You're not alone in there. I heard you talking." I did not move. I did not look toward the chamber. I did not betray anything with a reaction. The man outside added, "That other guy is going to kill you. He's going to steal what you have. I can stop it. I can help you." His words were shaped around a plan. Isolate me from my only known variable. Push me toward him. It was a simple play. It works on exhausted people. It works on hungry people. It works on people who want an authority figure to exist again. I did something I had avoided for 2 weeks. I spoke, but I did not give him distance. I did not give him light. I spoke from deep behind the bend, voice steady, and I kept it short. "Leave." Silence outside. Then a low laugh that echoed wrong in the opening. "So he is alive." I did not speak again. The man outside did not leave right away. He started talking about my life. Little details, enough to make the hair on my arms lift. My major, my professor, the field site, a comment I had made in class once about faults and water. Nothing impossible to know if someone had access to the group chat, the department email list, the kind of small academic world that leaks information even in normal times. It was still wrong to hear it now, in this setting, outside a sealed hole in a mountain. Then he did something else. He spoke toward the woods, not the tunnel. He answered, "He's in there." A pause. "Yeah, bring it up." I backed away from the bend fast, quiet but urgent, toward the chamber. I did not want to be at the front if he brought infected toward the entrance on purpose. I did not want to be pinned where my only exit was the same narrow gap. In the chamber, I checked the slit again, then crouched and listened. I heard the scuff of boots outside, then something dragging, a heavy scrape on rock, then a sound that made my throat tighten, the uneven footfall of an infected very close to the entrance, mixed with the harsh voice of the man guiding it. Come on, right here." He was using it. He was bringing it to my door the way someone might bring a dog to a fence. I had to choose between staying silent and risking the infected pushing into the opening, or making noise and drawing more. I chose a third option. I went to my gear bag, grabbed a small can of bear spray I carried for trail work, and moved back toward the bend. I hated that I had it. I hated that I might use it on a person, but it was not lethal. It was a tool that could buy space. I waited until I heard the infected hit the metal plate with a dull thump, then another, then the scrape of hands on rock. The man outside laughed again, quick. He hears it. He knows. Then the footsteps inside the opening. Not the infected, a human foot stepping into my tunnel. That was the boundary crossed. I stood from behind my rock wall, turned on the headlamp full brightness, and aimed it down the passage. The beam hit a man's face at the entrance turn, washed it out, made him flinch and raise a hand. He was not old, maybe mid-30s. He wore a dirty jacket and gloves with the fingertips cut off. Behind him, in the wedge of daylight, the infected shape pressed forward, hands pawing the gap, head tilted. I did not talk. I stepped forward one pace and sprayed the bear spray in a hard line that caught the man full in the face. He jerked back instantly, hands clawing at his eyes, choking sounds trapped in his throat. He stumbled, hit the metal plate, and fell out of the opening onto the berm outside. The infected pushed forward into the gap, drawn by the noise and movement. I did not let it come in. I grabbed the metal panel I had used earlier and jammed it into the opening from the inside, slamming it hard so it wedged against the plate and rock. The infected's hands slapped the panel. The sound was close and sharp. I shoved a concrete chunk behind the panel to brace it. Outside, the man was making strangled sounds, rolling in the dirt, trying to breathe through pain. I could hear him, which meant anyone nearby could hear him too. That was the point. He had tried to use an infected as a tool. Now he was the loudest thing on the slope. I retreated to the bend and turned off the lamp. I did not celebrate. I did not feel strong. I felt older in a way that had nothing to do with time. The tunnel held the infected scratching for a while. Then the sound moved away, either following the man's noise downhill or getting distracted by something else. That night, the unseen neighbor spoke again, one sentence from the darkness behind the chamber. "He will not stop." I answered, quiet, "I know." The next day, I made the tunnel harder to enter in a way I should have done from the start. I committed to the idea that this opening was temporary, even if I stayed weeks. I took more time, more risk, and went outside with a plan to gather heavier materials. I found a broken pallet near a maintenance pull-off and dragged it uphill inch by inch, scraping it over roots. I found a length of chain in the bed of a truck and hauled it back. I found an old road sign panel, bent and detached, and carried it like a shield. Each trip was a gamble, but each trip changed the tunnel's future. With the pallet, chain, and metal panel, I built a more serious internal gate at the entrance that I could secure from the inside. Not airtight, not perfect, but it meant an intruder could not simply pry the plate and step in. He would have to force through a second barrier and make noise doing it. I positioned it so the infected's random pushing could not dislodge it easily. I tested it by leaning my weight into it. The gate held. Food stayed the limiting factor. The cars were being picked clean over time. I found fewer sealed snacks each run. I started taking things I would have ignored earlier. A can of beans with no can opener. A box of cereal crushed into dust. Packets of instant oatmeal. I found a small camp stove in a trunk and a half-empty fuel canister. I did not use it much, but I kept it. Warm food underground is not just comfort. It is heat and morale and the ability to stay awake without losing focus. Still, I cooked only when I was sure no one was near the entrance, and I kept the flame small and quick. I also learned the tunnel's weather. It was cold every day, but the damp shifted. After heavy rain outside, the drip rate doubled and small rivulets formed along the floor. I had to reroute water with rocks so it did not soak my bedding. I carved a shallow trench with my rock hammer in the clay to guide runoff away from my sleep spot. I stuffed cracks with spare cloth. It was boring work, the kind no one writes about, but it was survival. Weeks blurred in a way I did not expect, because the tunnel light never changed, unless I changed it. I used my watch and small ritual markers. I scratched short lines on a flat rock for days. I rationed battery use. I learned to sit in near dark and see shapes with the faintest glow. I learned the difference between my own footstep and someone else's, not by magic, but by repetition. My step had a certain hesitation. A stranger's step carried confidence or ignorance. The unseen neighbor never crossed my bend again. My tape markers near the slit stopped showing fresh scuffs after a while, which meant he had either found another way out, or he had left entirely, or he had learned to move without disturbing anything I could notice. I did not assume the best. I assumed uncertainty. Uncertainty was safer. Then, one afternoon, I heard a new sound at the entrance. Not tools, not voices, but a slow pushing, repeated, with a wet rasp. An infected had found the opening again, likely drawn by the faint human smell that never fully leaves a place once you live in it. The internal gate held against the pushing for a while. Then the chain rattled. I moved forward with the bear spray and a length of metal pipe I had found on one of my runs. I positioned myself behind the bend so the infected could not see light until it was close. The infected squeezed into the gap enough that its hands reached the gate slats, its head pressed against wood. It made a low sound in its throat. Not a roar, not a movie noise, just a strained, repetitive exhale. I waited until it pushed hard. Then I sprayed through the slats. The spray caught its face. It recoiled and thrashed, slapping the gate, rattling the chain. It backed out in jerks, then stumbled down slope. The sound faded. I sat on the tunnel floor afterward and stared at my hands. Not shaking, just dirty and steady. Hands that had done field work and typed papers and held coffee cups. Now those hands were deciding who could breathe near my doorway. That was the clearest education the collapse offered. Every soft skill becomes a hard skill when rules vanish. By the time the pass quieted enough that I could step outside and hear only wind and distant water, I realized waiting out the collapse did not mean it ended. It meant the first violent wave had passed and left a new baseline behind. The cars stayed. The abandoned bags stayed. The occasional infected drifted through. Humans became rarer, which made each human more dangerous. A lone person on a mountain road is not automatically a fellow survivor. A lone person is a question with teeth. I made a decision in the 5th week that I had avoided because it meant leaving the one place I knew. I would move east, not down into the cities, not toward the jammed highways, but along the quieter routes, following the ridgelines and service roads where possible. I could not live in the tunnel forever. Food would run out. Batteries would run out. One determined human would eventually bring the wrong kind of attention again. The tunnel was a hold, not a home. Before I left, I did something I did not expect. I went back to the chamber and checked the slit one last time. I found, tucked under a rock, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a cheap lighter, a packet of instant coffee, and a folded note torn from a notebook. The handwriting was rough and quick. It said only, "He is gone. Road west is dead. Go east. No name, no goodbye." I stared at the note for a long time. It did not make me trust the unseen man. It did not make me feel grateful in a clean way. It just confirmed what I already knew. Someone had been there. Someone had watched. Someone had chosen, at least once, not to hurt me. That was enough to complicate everything. I packed at dawn. I took only what mattered. Water, the filter, remaining food, the blanket, the lighter, the bear spray, the pipe, spare batteries, my notebook, and the map. I left behind anything that slowed me. I took the note and stuffed it into the notebook sleeve because it felt dangerous to leave proof of my route for anyone else. At the entrance, I dismantled part of my internal gate and dragged the pallet deeper in, hiding it behind the bend. I scattered gravel over my tracks. I pushed the concrete chunks back into place and angled the metal plate so it looked more sealed than before. I wanted the opening to look uninviting, not because I cared who used it next, but because I did not want the man with my name to claim it as his. If he found it and thought it empty, he might move on. I slipped out and moved into the trees, keeping low, listening. The highway below was a graveyard of vehicles. A few birds picked at crumbs on the asphalt. No one honked, no one shouted. Farther down the slope, an infected shuffled between cars, alone, hands dragging along metal as it walked. It did not see me. I did not let it. I headed east along the rough ground above the road, keeping distance, watching for movement. The mountain air smelled of wet fur and cold stone. It smelled normal, which was the strangest part. The world can end and still smell normal. I kept moving anyway, because normal smells do not mean normal rules. By late morning, I reached a point where the slope flattened and an old service road cut across, partially washed out but passable on foot. I paused there, crouched behind a boulder, and looked back toward the notch where my tunnel opening hid. I did not feel nostalgia. I felt a hard gratitude for having survived inside it, and a sharper knowledge that staying would have killed me sooner or later. The tunnel had taught me what the collapse really was. Not one dramatic moment, but a series of small decisions that add up until your old life cannot be recovered. I turned away and kept going east, one careful step at a time, letting distance do what walls could not.